Welcome to Rain Narrator channel where we take you on a journey of deep relaxation and complete tranquility with the sound of raindrops adding an atmosphere of tranquility and comfort. Relax, enjoy, and prepare to enter the world of dreams. If you are looking for an ideal way to relax or calm your mind before sleep, you are in the right place. Follow us to get the best stories. Our story. It all began in the most unexpected way. I wasn't looking for love when I first saw her. In fact, I didn't even expect to find someone like her in this small town. I grew up in a place where everyone shared the same customs, the same language, and the same way of thinking. My life was simple, routine, predictable, and comfortable. But everything changed when I met her. Her name was Elena, and she had moved to our town from a faraway place. I still remember the first time I saw her. I was walking through the market on a busy afternoon, the sun shining a little too harshly as I tried to shield my eyes. There she was, standing in front of a small cafe, completely out of place with her foreign clothes and her unfamiliar accent. But there was something magnetic about her, a presence I couldn't quite put into words. She was staring at the menu, looking a little lost, and I could tell right away that she wasn't from around here. "Can I help you with that?" I had asked, approaching her. My voice was more nervous than I intended, but she turned to me with a smile that could have lit up the whole street. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, but it carried a warmth that made me feel instantly at ease. "I'm not sure what to order. I've never had this kind of food before." I chuckled. "It's a bit of a specialty here. I can recommend something if you'd like." That was how it all started. Little did I know that one conversation would change my life forever. Over the next few weeks, we ran into each other often. I'd see her at the market, at the library, even walking by the park. She wasn't the type to stand out in a crowd, but there was something about her that made me pay attention. Her curiosity about the world around her was infectious. She asked so many questions about our town, our culture, our food, and she always listened with a genuine interest. Like every detail mattered. I was fascinated by her, but there was also a part of me that felt a little out of place with her. I had never been with someone who didn't share the same background, the same traditions, the same way of life. She was raised in a different country, speaking a different language, with values that were sometimes hard for me to understand. But she was so open, so patient with me that it made everything feel easy. She never judged, never questioned why things were the way they were here. She just accepted it all like a traveler passing through, admiring the landscape without needing to change it. One evening, we sat in the park on the old bench by the fountain, watching the sunset together. It was one of those quiet, peaceful moments where everything around us seemed to fade into the background. She looked at me with those bright, curious eyes, and I couldn't help but wonder if she saw something in me that I couldn't see myself. "Do you ever think about your future?" she asked, breaking the silence. I thought for a moment. "I think about it sometimes, but I've always just assumed it would look like the lives of everyone around me. Simple, small, nothing extraordinary." She nodded. "I used to think the same way, but when I moved here, I realized that the future doesn't have to be defined by where you're from or what others expect from you. It's about finding your own path, no matter where that leads." Her words stayed with me long after that day. She had this way of looking at the world that made me rethink everything. For the first time, I wasn't content to just live the life that was mapped out for me. Elena opened my eyes to the idea that love, life, and happiness could be found anywhere, if you were brave enough to pursue it. The more we spent time together, the more our differences became less of a barrier and more of an opportunity to learn from one another. She taught me about her culture, the festivals, the music, the stories from her childhood, and I shared my own traditions with her. We cooked together, tried new foods, laughed at our mistakes, and slowly built a world of our own that blended the best of both of our lives. But it wasn't always easy. There were times when we faced challenges that neither of us had anticipated. People in the town started to talk. There were whispers about a foreign girl and a local boy, about our families' histories, about how we were so different from one another. Some people couldn't understand why we would choose to be together. They didn't see how we were building something stronger than the sum of our differences. They only saw what divided us. I remember the first time Elena came to my house for dinner. My family was welcoming, of course, but there was an awkwardness in the air. My mother kept asking her questions about where she was from, about her parents, about her life back home. Elena answered graciously, but I could see the discomfort in her eyes. She wasn't used to being put under the spotlight like that, and I knew my family was just curious, but I also knew it wasn't easy for her to explain things that felt so far removed from the life she had now. But as the weeks passed, things started to change. Slowly but surely, the people around us started to see how our relationship wasn't just about love. It was about understanding. We showed them that despite our different backgrounds, we had something powerful in common. A deep connection that transcended culture and language. It was something they could feel in the way we looked at each other, in the way we supported each other through the highs and lows of life. And that's when I realized something. I had spent my whole life thinking that love had to fit into certain boxes, into the mold of what society expected. But Elena taught me that love doesn't care about borders or traditions. It doesn't need permission or validation, it just is. We faced many hurdles along the way. There were misunderstandings, moments of doubt, and fears about what our families and friends would say, but none of that mattered. We knew what we had was real, and no amount of judgment or confusion could take that away from us. Looking back now, I'm amazed at how far we've come. Our love has become a blend of both our worlds, rich with stories from her homeland and mine. Our cultures have intertwined in ways I never imagined, and every day, I am grateful for the lessons she's taught me, not just about her world, but about my own. When I look at her now, I see more than just the girl from another country. I see my best friend, my partner, my equal. She's no longer someone who is different. She's the person I've chosen to share my life with. In all its messy, beautiful complexity, it hasn't always been easy, but every moment with Elena has been worth it. Love, I've learned, isn't about finding someone who's like you. It's about finding someone who makes you see the world through new eyes and helps you become the best version of yourself. It all began when I decided to take a trip to a place far from home, somewhere I had always dreamt of seeing. The world seemed bigger than ever, and I was ready for an adventure. I had never been one to plan every little detail, so I ended up booking a flight to a distant country, not quite sure what to expect. The flight was long, and I was already feeling a little out of place in a land where I didn't know the language, the culture, or even the food. The moment I stepped off the plane, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. And that's when I saw her. She was standing near the baggage claim, a little lost, just like me. Her eyes were scanning the crowd, and for a brief moment our gazes met. I had no idea who she was, but it felt like the world around us slowed down. Her smile was warm and effortless, and she had this energy about her, an unspoken curiosity about the world. It turned out that we were staying in the same hotel, and our paths crossed again at the front desk. She introduced herself as Lily, and I couldn't help but be drawn to her. There was something about her presence that felt so calm and yet adventurous, as if she was equally excited to be in a new place, but also unafraid to explore it on her own. We talked for a while, and I learned that she was traveling solo too, having just finished her university studies. Her eyes sparkled as she told me about her love for exploring unfamiliar places and her desire to learn something new every day. Our first day together was pure serendipity. We ended up on a guided tour, but the moment the group started walking, we both found ourselves drifting to the back, talking about everything and nothing at all. It felt so easy to speak with her, like I had known her for years. The hours flew by, and before we knew it, the tour had ended, but we both didn't want to part ways. We spent the next few days together exploring the streets of this foreign land. Every corner we turned, every new cafe we tried, it felt like we were in our own little world. We were both fascinated by the culture, the language, and the people around us. But more than that, we were fascinated by each other. As the days passed, I started to notice how much she cared for the world and the people in it. She had this incredible empathy that made everyone she met feel like they were the most important person in the room. I admired how she embraced every moment, always asking questions, always seeking to understand. And slowly, without even realizing it, I was falling for her. One night, we found ourselves at a rooftop restaurant, watching the city lights twinkle beneath us. We were talking about our hopes for the future when Lily turned to me with a soft smile, her eyes reflecting the glow of the stars above. "Isn't it amazing," she said, "how the world feels so big, but in moments like this it feels so small?" I couldn't help but smile back. It was true. In that moment with her, the world did feel smaller. All that mattered was the connection we shared. I don't know exactly when it happened, when I went from enjoying her company to realizing that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. But somewhere between the laughter, the quiet moments, and the way she made every place we visited feel like home, I knew I had found something special. I didn't need a grand declaration. It was in the way we looked at each other, in the way our hearts seemed to beat in sync as we traveled together. When the time came for us to leave, neither of us was ready to say goodbye. We promised to keep in touch, to visit each other, to keep the magic of our time together alive. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot, and as I boarded the flight back home, I realized that love, much like travel, has a way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. I had set off on an adventure to find new places and new experiences, but I never imagined I'd find the love of my life along the way. It was the first day of the creative writing workshop, and I remember sitting in the corner, trying to look confident but feeling out of place. I had always loved writing, but the thought of sharing my stories with strangers made me nervous. The room was small, with mismatched chairs and desks scattered around, the smell of old books hanging in the air. I took a deep breath as the instructor, a woman with a sharp haircut and bright eyes, began explaining the course structure. We would be reading each other's work, critiquing, discussing, and perhaps most terrifying of all, sharing our own creations. I remember hearing her voice, but my attention kept wandering. That's when I saw her. She was sitting at the far end of the room next to the window. Her hair, dark and unruly, cascaded down her back in waves. She had a quiet intensity about her, like she was observing everything and everyone without really participating. I caught her glancing around the room, her eyes flicking briefly over me before returning to her notebook. She was scribbling furiously, a faint frown on her face. It was as if the world around her was a blur, and all that mattered was the story taking shape in her mind. I told myself not to stare, but I couldn't help it. There was something magnetic about her presence, as if nothing else existed in that moment, or maybe it was her quiet confidence, the way she didn't feel the need to draw attention to herself. The first few weeks passed without much interaction between us. I focused on my writing, my stories about lost souls and quiet moments, and kept to myself, but I noticed her more and more. There was something different about her work. It wasn't just about the words she used. It was about the emotions that lingered in them. The way she made ordinary things feel extraordinary. There was a rawness to her writing that made me feel as if she had uncovered some deep truth about the world, one that I was still trying to grasp. Then came the day we had to share our work for the first time. I remember my hands shaking as I read my piece aloud. It was a short story, about a man who couldn't escape the memory of someone he loved. The words felt too personal, too exposed, but I read them anyway, my voice wavering in the quiet room. When I finished, there was a long silence. I glanced around the room, waiting for someone to speak, but all I saw were blank faces. Everyone was silent. Everyone except her. I think, she began, her voice soft but sure. I think you're afraid of letting go. Her words caught me off guard, and I had to swallow hard before I could respond. It's like you're holding on to something, even though you know it's gone, and that's why he can't move forward. I felt a strange warmth in my chest, as if her words had pierced right through me. It wasn't just the critique, it was the way she saw the story, how she saw me in the words I'd written. It was a feeling I hadn't expected, like being understood in a way I never thought possible. From that moment, I couldn't stop thinking about her. After that class, I found myself lingering by the door, hoping for a chance to talk to her, even though I didn't know what to say. And then one day, as we were all packing up to leave, she approached me. I remember her eyes, deep and inquisitive, as if she had been waiting for me to say something first. Your story, she said, her voice quieter now. It stayed with me. I don't think I've read anything like it before. It's beautiful in a way that hurts. I laughed nervously. Yeah, it kind of feels like that, doesn't it? Like beauty and pain are the same thing. She smiled a little wistfully, and for a moment, we stood there in silence. Two strangers who had just shared something unspoken. I don't know why I did it, but I asked if she wanted to grab coffee with me sometime. Her eyes widened a little, as if surprised, but then she nodded. That coffee turned into another and then another. We started meeting outside of class, sometimes at the coffee shop down the street, sometimes at the park where we would sit and talk for hours. Not about writing, but about everything. the way the light looked at sunset, the way old songs made us feel things we couldn't explain, the books we loved and hated. And slowly, I started to realize that we were sharing pieces of ourselves in ways that felt both terrifying and comforting. I think it was the way she listened to me, like I mattered in a way that no one else had ever made me feel. That made me start falling for her. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was the way she saw the world, the way she saw me, and the way she made me feel like I wasn't alone in my thoughts. She had a way of turning ordinary things into extraordinary moments. One afternoon, after a particularly long conversation about the characters in our stories, I asked her, "Do you ever write about us?" She paused, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in what felt like forever. "Sometimes," she said, her voice soft, "but I don't think I could ever write about you the way you really are. You're too real, too complicated." I couldn't help but smile. "I don't think I could write about you either." That's when I knew. There was something between us, something more than just words, more than just a connection through our writing. It was something deeper, something unspoken but understood, and it scared me because I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. But at the same time, I couldn't stop myself from wanting it. In the end, our relationship didn't grow out of grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It grew from the quiet moments, the shared words, the stolen glances, the slow unraveling of our lives as we learned to trust each other. We found a rhythm in each other's company, a balance between writing and living, between being two separate people and becoming something more. And now when I look back on that first day of the workshop, I realized that it wasn't just a class about writing. It was a class about life, about love, about the way two people can collide and find themselves in the process. She was the one who made me believe that words weren't just a way to tell a story, they were a way to live it. So here I am, still writing, still trying to capture those moments, and still grateful for the day she saw me, really saw me and reminded me that sometimes the best stories are the ones that write themselves. It was one of those chilly afternoons in November when I first saw her, the kind where you walk into a gallery and the cold seems to melt away once you step inside, leaving you surrounded by the warmth of colors and the hum of whispered thoughts from the artwork. I wasn't planning to stay long. I usually just browse, not expecting to find anything that really spoke to me. But that day was different. I had no idea what drew me to that particular painting. It was just another piece among the hundreds lining the walls, but something about it stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a chaotic swirl of colors, reds, oranges, and a hint of violet. The brushstrokes were wild but beautiful, like the artist had poured their soul into every stroke. I stood there just staring at it, trying to make sense of it, when I heard a soft voice behind me. "It's strange, isn't it? How something so messy can be so perfect." I turned around, startled, and there she was, a girl in a simple black dress, her brown hair pulled back into a loose bun, her eyes the color of dark honey. She had that look about her, the kind of look that told you she was always thinking, always searching for something. I fumbled for the right words. "It's like a storm, but in a good way, like chaos trying to find peace." She smiled, a knowing smile. "I've always thought that's what art is. A way to capture moments of peace in a world that's constantly moving. This piece is like a captured storm." I nodded. She wasn't wrong. We stood in silence for a few seconds, both of us lost in the painting. The noise of the world outside seemed to vanish. It was just us and the art, two strangers connected in a way I couldn't explain. "I'm Elena," she said, breaking the silence. "Elena," I repeated, tasting the name on my tongue. "I'm Lucas." "Nice to meet you, Lucas," she said, and her smile widened. "What brings you to this exhibit?" I shrugged. "I come here sometimes. I like the quiet, the paintings, they help me think." "I get that," she said, her gaze drifting back to the artwork. "I used to think art was just something pretty to look at, but then I started seeing it differently. It's not about the image. It's about what it makes you feel, what it makes you think." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by how deeply she spoke about something as simple as a painting. "How do you see it now?" She took a breath, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't place. "I guess I see art as a way to communicate with the world. There's so much we don't say, so much we can't say. But art, it speaks for us. It tells the stories we're too scared to tell, or too lost to understand." I was taken aback. That's a really beautiful way to look at it." She laughed softly. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of a romantic about these things. It was at that moment in the quiet hum of the gallery that I realized something. This girl, this Elena, she wasn't just another person passing through my life. There was something about her, about the way she saw the world, that mirrored something inside me I had never shared with anyone. We spent the next hour wandering through the exhibit together, talking about the paintings, about life, about the things we loved and feared. As it turned out, we both had a shared dream, to be artists, not just to paint or create, but to make something that would leave a mark on the world. I had always wanted to be a painter, but somewhere along the way, I had convinced myself it was too far-fetched. Elena, though, she was determined. She was studying art, she said, in the hope that one day her work would change people's lives. I want to create pieces that make people feel something they didn't. No, they could feel, she said, her voice full of passion. I want to help them see the beauty in the brokenness. Art can heal, you know? I nodded, feeling something stir inside me. That's exactly how I feel. I've always been afraid that my art won't be good enough, that it'll just be a waste of time. Don't be afraid, she said, her voice gentle but firm. The best art comes from vulnerability. It's about showing people your soul, not perfecting the image. We all have something to say, Lucas, don't hide it. Her words struck deep like a bolt of lightning, clearing away the fog that had clouded my mind for years. Here in the company of a stranger, I felt like I was finally seeing clearly. We exchanged numbers before parting ways, both of us promising to meet again soon. That was the first of many meetings between us. We spent hours in coffee shops, libraries, and art galleries, discussing our dreams, our fears, and everything in between. With every conversation, I found myself falling more and more for her, not just for her beauty, but for her mind, for the way she viewed the world, for her unwavering belief in the power of art. We painted together, too. She taught me techniques I'd never thought of, and I showed her how to let go of perfectionism and embrace the messiness of creation. Slowly, I started to believe in my art again. Slowly, I began to believe in myself. And then one evening, after we'd spent hours working side by side in a small studio she rented, she turned to me with a smile that made my heart race. You know, she said, I think we're both afraid of the same thing. What's that? I asked, barely able to breathe. Being too much of who we are. What if our dreams don't come true? What if we're just two artists, lost in the noise of a world that doesn't understand? I stared at her, my chest tightening. What if it doesn't matter? Her eyes softened, and she took my hand in hers. What do you mean? I smiled, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. What if, even if no one ever sees our work, we're still doing what we're meant to do? We're creating for the sake of creation. Isn't that enough? She squeezed my hand, and for the first time I saw it. The dream we shared wasn't about recognition or success. It was about creating something real, something honest, something that made us feel alive. We didn't need the world to understand us. We just needed to understand each other. And in that moment, surrounded by paint and canvases, I knew that the art we would create together wasn't just about the pieces we painted. It was about the life we were building, a life filled with dreams, with passion, and with a love that would live on in every brushstroke we made. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, like the storm we had first seen together, but it was ours, and that was all we needed. It all started the way most things do in life, by chance. I was playing at a small, dimly lit cafe one evening, fingers dancing over the keys of my piano, lost in the music. This was my life. A quiet, unnoticed pianist, playing covers of songs for a crowd that usually only half listened, their attention elsewhere. It was nothing glamorous, but I loved it. Music was my sanctuary. Then she walked in. I remember the moment so clearly. She had this energy like a fresh breeze, the kind that makes the whole room feel brighter. The sound of her voice wasn't the first thing I noticed, but I felt it when she stepped into the cafe. She was young, with this kind of quiet confidence about her. Her dark hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she wore a simple dress that had probably seen better days, but somehow it only added to her charm. She didn't seem like the type to settle for just being ordinary, though. She ordered a coffee and found a table near the stage where I was playing. At first I thought she was just another patron, but then I saw it. She was watching me with an intensity I wasn't used to. Most people glanced at the pianist in passing, but her gaze was focused, studying the way my fingers moved on the keys. I didn't understand why, but it unnerved me a little. It was as if she was seeing something in my playing that no one else did. Later that night, after I finished my set, she came up to me. Her voice was soft, but there was this clarity to it. "Your playing, it was beautiful," she said. "I've never heard someone play with so much feeling." I didn't know what to say. People complimented me all the time, but hers felt different. It wasn't just flattery, it was genuine. I thanked her, and she smiled before continuing. "I sing," she added, almost shyly. "Maybe we could work together sometime." That simple suggestion, one I had brushed off as a casual comment, changed everything. We started meeting at odd hours, her voice blending with the notes I played. She had a raw, unpolished beauty to her singing, and every time she hit a note, I felt it stir something deep inside me. But what we had wasn't just about the music, it was about the way she made me feel alive. The kind of alive where everything else disappears, where you feel like you could play forever and never get tired. She had this way of making everything seem like it was meant to be. Like we were meant to be. At first we were just two people getting together in the corner of that cafe, figuring things out. But over time, something else began to happen. The more we practiced together, the more I realized that I wasn't just drawn to her talent, I was drawn to her. There was a vulnerability in her eyes when she sang, like she was letting the world see the parts of her that no one else did, and I was slowly falling for it, her spirit, her passion, her heart. One day, out of the blue, she asked me a question that shook me to my core. "Do you ever think about what comes next for us? I mean, for the music? For you and me?" I remember freezing for a second. The way she looked at me, waiting for an answer, it felt like the world had slowed down. I wanted to say something profound, something that would make her see how much she meant to me, but instead I just blurted out the truth. "I think we're already making something special, and I want to keep making it with you." Her face softened, and I saw her lips curl into a small smile. "I've been thinking the same thing." It wasn't long after that we decided to take the leap. We joined a band, one of those experimental projects that were just starting to gain traction in the local scene. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty at first. The band was a mix of personalities, all trying to figure out how we fit together. But there was something about the way we worked, her and me, that made everything feel like it was falling into place. We played in small venues, sometimes barely getting by. But we were learning, growing, and through it all, the bond between us strengthened. The nights were long, the rehearsals grueling, but the moments we shared, off stage and on stage, were the kind that left a mark on your soul. Remember one night, after a particularly difficult show, we were walking back to the bus, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement. I turned to her, feeling more vulnerable than I'd ever felt before. "You know, sometimes I think about how far we've come, and how far we still have to go," I said. She paused, looking at the stars above us as if searching for something. "But we've made it this far together." Her words hit me like a wave. I realized then, standing there in the cool night air, that we had created something that neither of us could have done alone. We were a team, not just in music, but in life. And as the days went on, that feeling didn't fade. It grew stronger. But like all love stories, there were challenges. We didn't always agree on everything, and sometimes it felt like the pressure of the band was pulling us in different directions. There were moments when I doubted, when I wondered if we could really make it in a world that seemed so fickle. But then I'd see her, her eyes full of determination, her voice soaring in a way that made the whole room fall silent. And I knew then that no matter what happened, I couldn't give up on this, on us. In the end, it wasn't the fame or the success that defined our story. It was the quiet moments between the music, the shared glances during a song, the laughter after a tough rehearsal, the soft words whispered in the silence of the night. We were no longer just a pianist and a singer. We were two people who had found something rare, something real. And I knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges we faced as a band, as musicians, it didn't matter as long as we had each other. I never thought that playing piano in a quiet cafe would lead me to something like this. A love built on music, on trust, and on something that felt like magic every time she sang. It all started one winter evening. I was sitting alone in my room, scrolling through some social media apps, when I stumbled upon her profile. She was nothing like anyone I'd ever seen before. Her posts were different from the usual selfies or travel pictures. They were thoughtful, often sharing snippets of poetry or little reflections on life. Her words felt like they were written just for me, as if I'd known her all my life. And something about that made me pause. I wasn't really the kind of person to reach out to strangers, especially online. But something about her caught my attention. Maybe it was the way her thoughts seemed so deep, or how her smile and the rare selfies she posted seemed genuine and kind. I decided to take a leap and send her a message, just a simple, "Hello." To my surprise, she replied within minutes. That was how it started, casual, simple. We began chatting first about little things, like our favorite books, movies, and music. I remember telling her about my obsession with a particular band, and she told me how she loved their lyrics too. It was strange. I was talking to someone thousands of miles away, but it felt like we were sitting in the same room, laughing over the same jokes. As the days went by, the conversations got deeper. We started talking about our dreams, our fears, the things that kept us awake at night. I shared my struggles with school, how I was worried about my future, and how sometimes I felt like I was falling behind. She listened patiently, always offering encouragement. I was amazed by how understanding she was, and how her words seemed to heal parts of me I didn't even know were broken. At first, I didn't realize I was falling for her. It happened slowly, like a melody that sneaks up on you and suddenly becomes your favorite song. She made me laugh in ways no one had before. I'd be walking down the street, and her random messages would make me smile for no reason. We started texting all day, every day. I'd wake up to her messages, and she'd go to sleep after wishing me good night. We found comfort in each other's presence, even though we hadn't yet met in real life. Then came the day when she asked, "What if we met someday?" At first, I thought it was just one of those things people say when they're talking about their dreams, but it felt different coming from her. My heart skipped a beat. What if we did meet? What would it be like? I didn't know the answers, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. After months of talking, I decided I had to see her. It wasn't enough to just text her. To hear her voice through the phone, I wanted to be there with her in person, to see if the magic we shared online would still be there in the real world. So I booked a ticket. I had never been more nervous in my life. When the day finally arrived, I waited at the airport, heart pounding. I could barely contain my excitement and anxiety. When I saw her walking toward me, I swear time stood still. She looked even more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. And she smiled at me like she knew exactly how I was feeling. It felt like we were picking up right where we left off, even though this was the first time we'd ever seen each other face to face. We spent the next few days together, exploring the city, talking, laughing, and sharing moments that felt like they were meant to happen. Every minute with her was like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. And by the end of my trip, I knew deep down that she was the one. We kept in touch after I returned home, but the distance between us didn't feel as daunting anymore. We had crossed the barrier from virtual to real, and now there was nothing that could keep us apart. We began making plans for the future. We talked about where we would live, what our home would look like, and even what our kids might be like. We laughed at how far we had come, from strangers on the internet to being so connected that it felt like we had known each other forever. Months went by, and I couldn't imagine a life without her. I knew I had to ask the question, the one that would change everything. One evening, after a long day of talking about our hopes and dreams, I told her how much I loved her. I told her that everything in my life had led me to this moment, that I couldn't picture a future without her by my side. With tears in her eyes, she said, "Yes." We were engaged, and it felt like the happiest moment of my life. Our love story, born from an internet connection, had blossomed into something real, something everlasting. We continued to travel back and forth, meeting whenever we could, each time growing closer, learning more about each other. It wasn't always easy. We faced challenges with the distance and time apart, but we always found a way to make it work. Then the day came when I finally asked her to marry me, but this time in person. I had planned it for months. We were sitting at the same spot where we first met, and I asked her to be mine forever. She said yes again, and it felt like a dream I never wanted to wake up from. We married a year later, surrounded by our family and friends, and the moment I saw her walking down the aisle, I knew everything had led me to her. The internet had been the bridge that connected us, but our love was the foundation we built everything on. It had started with a simple hello, but it ended with a lifetime of I do's. And so here we are, living our story every day, proving that love can bloom anywhere, even in the most unexpected places like the internet. I remember the first time I saw her like it was yesterday. We were just kids, maybe 7 or 8, running around the playground with the wild freedom that only children possess. Her name was Maya. She had this laugh that sounded like the ringing of a bell, bright, carefree, and full of life. I don't know what it was, but something about her captivated me, even at that age. I was shy, always hanging back, watching her from a distance as she played with her friends. Yet she somehow knew I was there. She'd wave at me, flashing that smile, and my heart would race, though I had no idea why. As we grew older, Maya and I became close friends. Our families lived in the same neighborhood, so we spent most of our time together. We'd talk about everything, school, life, dreams, and one day, I remember asking her, "What's your dream?" She smiled softly, her eyes distant as if imagining something far away. "I want to see the world," she said. "I want to leave this place and experience everything." At that moment, I didn't fully understand what she meant. I didn't understand how someone could want to leave something so familiar, so warm. But I nodded, thinking she was just talking about traveling on weekends or during holidays. Years passed. We were teenagers now, and those feelings I had for Maya had grown into something deeper, something I couldn't quite name, but something I could no longer ignore. I found myself thinking about her all the time. When I woke up, when I was at school, when I lay in bed at night, I'd get this knot in my stomach every time I saw her laugh or talk to someone else. She was everything to me, her kindness, her beauty, her sense of humor, the way she always seemed to brighten up the room. But I was too afraid to tell her how I felt. I was terrified she wouldn't feel the same way, terrified that I'd lose our friendship. So I kept it to myself, burying my feelings deep down, even though they burned like a fire in my chest. And then one day, out of nowhere, it happened. She told me she was leaving. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to hide the panic in my voice, pretending it was no big deal. "To study abroad," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm going to London." My world tilted on its axis, and I could feel my heart break in a way I hadn't even realized was possible. All this time I'd been so caught up in my own feelings, in my own fear, that I hadn't even seen what was happening around me. Maya wasn't just dreaming of a future somewhere far away. She was leaving, and I couldn't do anything about it. The day she left, I stood at the airport, my hands shaking as I tried to hold back the tears. She hugged me tight, her cheek pressed against mine, and for a brief moment, everything felt right again. I wanted to tell her then, but the words wouldn't come. I wanted to tell her that I loved her, that I had loved her for years, that I'd always been there for her, waiting for the right moment, but the right moment never came. Instead, I just stood there, holding her, afraid that if I let go, she might disappear forever. "Promise me you'll visit when you can," she said with a playful smile, as if she didn't know how deeply her leaving had torn me apart. "You'll come see me in London, right?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Of course," I whispered, but inside, I didn't know if I'd ever be able to keep that promise. And so she was gone. The months after her departure were the hardest I've ever lived through. I tried to move on, tried to go back to my life as normal, but nothing was the same without her. I kept my distance from everyone, avoiding the people who used to know me as the guy who was always laughing, always happy. It was like a piece of me was missing. I couldn't concentrate at school. I couldn't focus on anything, and I just drifted through life in a haze. I tried to keep in touch with Maya, of course. We'd message each other every now and then, share updates on our lives, and she'd send me pictures of the places she was visiting. I could hear the excitement in her voice every time we spoke on the phone. London seemed to be everything she had dreamed of, and I was happy for her, I really was. But each time I saw her smiling in a picture or heard her voice, the ache in my chest would grow stronger. I realized too late that I had waited too long to tell her how I felt, and now she was 1,000 miles away, living a life that didn't involve me. One day I got an unexpected message from her. "I miss you," she said, "and I've been thinking about you a lot. I think about when we were younger, and the things we used to do. Do you ever think about those days?" I stared at the message for what felt like hours, my heart pounding in my chest. Do I think about those days? How could I not? They were everything. But there was a part of me that knew deep down that we were both different now. We were living in different worlds, with different dreams, and no matter how much I wanted to pull her back, to tell her how much I loved her, I couldn't change the fact that she had already built a life for herself across the ocean. That message from Maya, though, stirred something in me. I realized with a clarity I had never felt before that maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe love wasn't about proximity or timing. Maybe love was about taking a chance even if the odds were stacked against you. So I wrote back, I miss you too. And yes, I think about those days all the time. But you've built something amazing for yourself, and I'm so proud of you. Maya, I'll always be here no matter where you are. It was the hardest thing I'd ever written, but it was also the truest. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Maya will stay abroad forever, or maybe she'll come back. I don't know if she ever truly felt the way I did about her, but one thing I know for sure is that I've loved her for as long as I can remember. And maybe love isn't just about being together in the same place at the same time. Maybe it's about giving someone the space to chase their dreams, even if it means watching them from afar. It was a quiet night when everything changed. I remember it like it was yesterday. An ordinary evening that turned into something I never saw coming. A walk through the neighborhood. I don't know why that night felt different. Maybe it was the stillness in the air, the crispness of the breeze, or just the need to clear my mind. But as I walked past her house, I noticed something that made my heart stop, the glow. A faint orange hue at first, creeping up from the side of her house. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was just the reflection of a car's headlights, or a street lamp playing tricks. But then I heard it, the unmistakable crackle of fire, the kind that sends shivers down your spine. My heart hammered in my chest, and I didn't think twice. I ran toward the house. I didn't even know her name, not yet. But there was something inside me that couldn't stand the thought of her being in danger. The fire was spreading quickly, licking at the side of the house, and I saw her standing in the front window, frozen in shock. I banged on the door yelling her name, praying she was still there. When she opened the door, she looked at me as though she couldn't quite understand what was happening, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Are you all right?" I asked, though I could see the fear in her eyes and hear the tremble in her voice. I don't know what to do," she said, the panic creeping in. The fire was close now. It was only a matter of time before the whole house could go up in flames. Without thinking, I reached for her hand and tugged her gently, urging her to move. "We need to get out of here now." She hesitated for a moment, but something in my eyes must have told her that I wasn't going to leave her. The trust was instant, though neither of us could explain why. As I pulled her through the front door and into the yard, I heard a crack and I saw part of the roof crumble. We didn't have much time. I had just come back from a long day of work and decided to take. I grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the street, my mind racing. I couldn't think straight. All I could think of was getting her to safety. The heat from the fire was unbearable now, and I felt the sweat rolling down my back as I practically dragged her to the sidewalk. When we were far enough away, I looked at her, my chest heaving with a mixture of relief and concern. She was trembling, her face pale, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. I don't know how long we stood there, just staring at the flames, both of us in shock. Then she turned to me, her voice barely a whisper. Who are you?" I couldn't help but smile, though the situation was far from humorous. A guy who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Her lips parted in a small, grateful smile. "Thank you." I shook my head. "There's no need to thank me. I couldn't let you stay in there. You're safe now." And just like that, it felt like everything shifted. The night, the fire, the panic. It all seemed to fade into the background as I looked at her. I didn't know who she was, but I knew I'd never forget this moment. Her name, I learned, was Lily. She had lived in the house for years, a quiet woman with a kind soul, though her life had been a series of hardships. But as she spoke, I realized that we both had our own struggles. Maybe it was the fire, or maybe it was the fact that in that moment, we had shared something raw and life-changing. Either way, something sparked between us, something that neither of us had expected. We exchanged numbers that night, just to make sure she was okay, to check in. But for me, it became more than just a promise to stay in touch. Every time we spoke, my heart raced. There was something in her voice that made me feel alive, something in the way she laughed that melted my worries away. We talked about everything: life, love, fears, dreams, and each conversation made me feel more connected to her, more drawn to her. I wanted to be near her, to protect her, to be the one who could make her smile through the darkest days. Weeks passed and I kept finding reasons to visit. At first it was to help her with the repairs. Her house had been badly damaged by the fire, and the insurance was dragging its feet. I couldn't stand seeing her struggle, so I'd show up, offering to help with whatever I could. But even though I was fixing her house, she was fixing something inside me. I found myself looking for her in a way I couldn't explain, feeling a sense of yearning that I couldn't push aside. And every time I saw her, every time we laughed together or shared a quiet moment, I realized more and more that I was falling in love with her. One evening, after I had helped her hang some curtains, we sat on the couch, both of us exhausted from the work. The house was beginning to feel like home again, and Lily was beginning to feel like everything. As we sat in silence, I felt the urge to speak, to tell her what had been building inside me for so long. "I'm falling for you, Lily," I said, my voice a whisper. She turned to me, her eyes wide with surprise. But there was no fear in them, only the softest hint of hope. I think I'm falling for you too." And that was it. In that moment, we both realized that the fire hadn't just destroyed a house. It had brought us together in a way neither of us could have predicted. The flames had burned away the walls we'd built around ourselves, and in their place, something new had emerged. I loved her. I knew I did. And I would spend every day of my life making sure she knew that she was the one I was meant to be with, the woman I was always meant to save, but who in the end saved me in ways I would never have imagined. It was one of those days when the world felt like it was moving in fast forward, and I was caught in the middle, barely holding on. I remember it clearly. It started like any other day, nothing extraordinary, but fate had other plans. I was a bit of a mess, to be honest. I had a few things going on in my life, a job I didn't love, and this overwhelming sense of something missing. I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't exactly fulfilled either. That's when it happened. I never thought I'd find myself in the ER, but I guess sometimes life has a way of throwing curveballs. I had twisted my ankle during a run. Not something that seemed like an emergency, but it hurt like hell. I couldn't walk properly and my mind was racing with a million thoughts. So I decided to go to the hospital just to be sure. When I walked through those automatic hospital doors, I wasn't expecting anything more than an hour of waiting and a quick checkup. But then I saw her. She was standing at the front desk in the emergency room, her eyes scanning over the notes in front of her. Calm, focused, like she had all the time in the world, except she didn't. I could tell by the way her body moved that she was used to the chaos of this place. The hospital was buzzing around her, but somehow she managed to remain the calm center of the storm. I must have been staring because she caught my eye and I froze. That's when I realized I was in trouble. She was beautiful. It wasn't just her appearance, it was the way she carried herself. She had that warmth in her eyes, like she genuinely cared about people. I knew right then and there that I would have a hard time walking away from this moment. She came over, her steps purposeful, and asked if I needed help. The words were simple, but the way she said them made me feel like I mattered. "Can I help you?" Her voice was smooth, kind, like music. I hesitated for a second, trying to decide how to explain the pain I was feeling. It wasn't just my ankle. I realized something about her presence made my heart race in a way I wasn't expecting. It felt like I'd stepped into a dream and I wasn't sure if I was awake. "Yeah, I think I twisted my ankle," I said, my voice a bit more unsure than I wanted it to be. I wasn't the type to ask for help easily, but somehow asking her felt right. She smiled at me, a real smile, and for a second I thought the whole room had quieted down, but maybe it was just my heart. She led me to one of the beds and asked me a few questions, checked my foot and made a few jokes to keep the mood light. It wasn't just the way she spoke, it was the way she cared, even though I was just some guy who had wandered in off the street. "I think you're going to be okay," she said, tapping my foot lightly. "Just some ice and rest, maybe a little bit of elevation." I nodded, but I couldn't stop thinking about how it felt when she touched me. It was just a doctor's assessment, but to me it felt like something more. The way her hands gently held my ankle, it was comforting. "I'll give you some painkillers, but you might want to stay off it for a bit." "We don't want this to get worse," she added, her eyes locking with mine for a moment, like she was really seeing me. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but at the same time it felt right. I didn't want to let her go, but I didn't know how to keep her there. She seemed to sense it, though, because she offered me a warm smile and said, "I'll check in on you again later, okay?" "Okay," I said, and watched her walk away, knowing I'd never forget that moment. I was just a patient in her care, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. As the days passed, I couldn't get her out of my head. I kept thinking about how natural it felt to talk to her, like we'd known each other for years, even though we'd only spoken for a few minutes. I wasn't the type to believe in fate, but I couldn't deny that something felt right about her, being the one to help me that day. I had to see her again. I found myself walking back into that same hospital the next week. It wasn't that I had another injury, thankfully, but I had to find a reason to be near her. I wasn't even sure if she'd remember me, but as soon as I walked in, she spotted me immediately. "You're back?" she asked, a little surprised, but not in a bad way. I smiled sheepishly. "I'm just here to pick up a prescription. No more injuries, I promise." Her laugh was soft, and I couldn't help but notice how it made my heart flutter. She didn't have to be so kind to me, yet she was, and it made everything feel a little brighter. We started talking more, just casual conversations at first. I told her about my job, about how I was stuck in a routine I wasn't sure I wanted. She listened, really listened, like she understood, and I listened to her too, about how she'd always known she wanted to be a doctor, how she found purpose in helping people even when it was hard. There was this fire in her eyes when she talked about her work, this passion that made everything else fade into the background, and over time we started seeing each other more. Not just in passing, but really spending time together. At first it was innocent, just talking over coffee or catching up after her shifts. But soon those moments turned into something deeper, something I couldn't ignore anymore. I was falling for her, and it was terrifying. I remember one night walking her out to her car after her shift. The stars were out and everything felt quiet and still. We stood there, just looking at the sky, and I couldn't hold back anymore. "I know this is sudden," I said, my heart pounding in my chest, "but I can't stop thinking about you. I don't know how it happened, but I think I'm falling for you." She turned to me, her eyes soft, her expression unreadable for a moment. And then she smiled, the kind of smile that made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. "I've been thinking about you too," she said, and my heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to admit it, but it's true. We stood there in the quiet, and in that moment, I knew that everything was about to change. It wasn't just an injury that brought us together. It was fate. And now we had the chance to write our own story. And so we did. We faced the ups and downs, the challenges of her demanding career, and the struggles of finding time for each other. But through it all, one thing remained constant: the connection we had from that first moment. The hospital brought us together, but it was our hearts that kept us there. It was the first night I looked up at the sky and truly saw it. I had always been fascinated by the stars, the planets and the galaxies, but that night felt different. I was standing alone on the university rooftop, the cold air nipping at my skin as I adjusted my telescope. The view was clearer than I'd ever hoped, and I had just pointed the scope towards the Andromeda galaxy when she appeared. At first, I didn't notice her. She was just a figure in the dim light, standing near the edge of the rooftop with a sketchbook in her hands. The faintest hint of moonlight revealed her long, dark hair, and the quiet focus in her expression seemed as intense as my own when I looked at the stars she was drawing. But it wasn't anything I could see clearly from where I stood. Just the act of her drawing, in silence, made me curious. She seemed to be lost in her own world, and in some strange way I felt connected to her right away. I could understand the feeling of being immersed in something so deeply that the outside world fades away. I took a few hesitant steps toward her, my shoes barely making a sound on the stone floor. I didn't want to disturb her, but I couldn't resist. "What are you drawing?" I asked, my voice more unsure than I meant it to be. She turned, startled at first, but then she smiled, and it felt like the moonlight suddenly found its way through the clouds. "It's the sky," she said, glancing up, "but not the stars, the way they make me feel." I felt a curious warmth spread through me. The stars had always made me feel something too, connection to something so much bigger than myself, but I never thought about it in the way she described it. "I study the stars," I said almost on impulse, as if her words had unlocked something in me. I know the science of them, the physics, but I think I understand what you mean. She studied me for a moment, her eyes curious, almost like she was trying to figure me out. I'm Clara, she said, closing her sketchbook and standing up. I'm Theo, I replied, unable to shake the feeling that this moment, this simple exchange, was something more. We stood there for a moment, staring at the stars in silence. I had always loved the way the stars sparkled, each one a story in itself. But now, for some reason, it felt different, like the sky held more secrets than I had ever realized. I wanted to explain it to her, tell her everything I knew about constellations and galaxies, but I didn't. Instead, I asked her, what about you? What makes you want to paint? Clara smiled again, and it was as if the entire universe was unfolding in her eyes. I've always wanted to capture the feeling of things, the way a color can make you feel something deep inside, the way a brushstroke can express something that words can't. Her gaze softened as she added, I think the stars are beautiful, but I've always wanted to capture the beauty of everything else. The moments that pass by unnoticed, the quiet stillness of a room, the way a shadow falls across the ground. I was captivated by the way she spoke, the passion behind her words. It reminded me of the feeling I had when I first looked at the stars through a telescope, the overwhelming sense of awe and wonder. So you paint moments? I asked. She nodded. I paint moments, the ones that matter. And then we just kept talking. We talked about everything, our dreams, our passions, our hopes. I told her about the farthest reaches of space that I had studied, and she told me about her paintings, her struggles with finding the right shade of blue, and the way she could get lost for hours in the act of creating. Somehow it felt as if the entire world had shrunk to just the two of us in that moment, and nothing else mattered. As the night wore on, I found myself looking up at the sky less and less, and instead, finding my gaze drawn to Clara. She wasn't just a girl I had met by chance. There was something in the way she saw the world, so full of color, so full of life, that made me feel like I was seeing things for the first time, even though I had always studied the universe. Days turned into weeks, and every night, I found myself looking for her on that same rooftop. We met there often, with Clara bringing her sketchbook or paints, and I brought my telescope. Sometimes we would talk for hours, lost in our conversations. Other times we would simply sit in silence, the soft hum of the city around us, each of us immersed in our own world. I started to realize that I was falling in love with her, not because of how beautiful she was, though she was stunning, but because of how she made me see the world. Clara showed me that there was more to life than the science of things. There was art, emotion, and beauty that couldn't be measured. She made me realize that the stars weren't just points of light in the sky. They were a symbol of something larger, something inexplicable, something like us. One evening, when the sky was particularly clear, I decided to show her something special. I had been studying a newly discovered star cluster that I thought might interest her. I set up my telescope and motioned for her to come over. She gazed through the lens and gasped. It's incredible, she whispered, as if she had just discovered something magnificent. It's called the Orion Nebula, I said softly. A place where new stars are born. Clara turned to me, her eyes wide with wonder. It's like you can see the beginnings of everything, she said, her voice full of awe. Like a painting that's not finished yet, but you can already feel the story. Her words struck me deeply. I had always known the science behind the nebula, but hearing her describe it in terms of creation, of possibility, made me see it differently. Maybe the universe is like a painting too, I said, smiling, endlessly in the process of becoming. Clara laughed softly, and for a moment, it felt like the stars were watching over us, a silent witness to our growing connection. Maybe we're all just brushstrokes in the universe's masterpiece, she said. From that night on, we kept meeting. Each conversation, each moment, felt like an unspoken promise that we were building something together. I was discovering not only new stars and galaxies, but also new parts of myself through her, and she was capturing the essence of everything I couldn't put into words. Our worlds, her paints and my stars, had collided in the most beautiful way. In time, our love story unfolded, just like the nebula I had shown her, a place of creation, of beauty, and of endless potential. We didn't know what the future held, but as I stood with her beneath the vast starlit sky, I knew one thing for sure. In that moment, in the space between her paints and my telescopic lens, we were creating something wonderful together. And perhaps, just like the stars, We too would continue to shine, forever a part of the same cosmic dance. I remember the day I met her. Soft sunlight filtered through the hospital windows, and there she was sitting beside my bed, a book in her hands. She looked out of place in the sterile, white room, like she belonged somewhere far more colorful. I was used to the silence of the hospital, to the faint beeping of machines and the distant footsteps of nurses. But when she walked in, everything changed. She smiled at me, a little shy at first, but that smile made me forget the pain, even if just for a moment. Her name was Lily. She was studying to become a nurse, and something about her, her kindness, the way she would talk to me like I wasn't just some patient, made me feel alive again. She didn't treat me like a fragile thing, and I liked that. I didn't have much to give, just the hours I spent in this white-walled prison. But she'd visit every day, sometimes reading to me, sometimes just talking about the silly things in her life. It wasn't much, but to me it was everything. The sound of her voice became my favorite part of the day. Her presence gave me hope. Hope I hadn't realized I'd been missing. There were days when I felt weak, when the illness threatened to swallow me whole. But when I saw her, I found the strength to smile. And she'd smile back as if I were the one helping her, when really it was her that kept me going. One day she sat closer than usual, her hand brushing mine, and the world outside that hospital room faded away. I couldn't tell her I loved her then. How could I? I was just a sick boy who probably didn't have much time left. But when she looked into my eyes, I knew she could see the truth. It wasn't in the words we said, but in the moments we shared. When I finally left the hospital, she gave me a kiss on my forehead and whispered, "I'll be waiting for you always." I couldn't promise her a future, but I knew that somehow in my heart, I'd carry her with me wherever I went.